My guest today, for the second time on Subversive, is blogger and researcher Anatoly Karlin. We talk about his disillusionment with the right wing, immigration, open borders. We also talk about the rise and fall and continued adventure of the Manosphere and growing hostility towards the gentler sex on the right wing. And we also talk about network states, genetic engineering, exo-wombs, exo-won'ts, exo-everything. And I think it's a really interesting conversation. This is the first 45 minutes of the conversation. The rest of it is on Substack. For the gentle price of a slightly more extravagant coffee a month, you can access this conversation in its entirety, about an hour and a half, I think it is, and every other conversation and everything I've written in the last few years. So this is essentially the entire archive of the podcast and my writing. Or if you are just interested in the audio version of the podcast, you could go to Patreon, and it is a slightly cheaper, more standard coffee per month that you could access. So this is the conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. He is back. It's been, I think, 2 years since he's been on the show. Fans of the show remember our last conversation about Russia, about Russian nationalism, about the war in Ukraine. And things have changed since then. And I'm very excited to talk to a different version of Anatoly Karlin this time, because I've enjoyed his writing in the interim. And I think there's quite a lot of interesting and fresh things to address. So welcome back, Anatoly.
Always very happy to be on your show, Alex. And yes, very happy to chronicle my journey from Russian ultranationalism to the big gay.
The big gay. Yes, indeed. Anatoly has switched sides. He's now a representative of big gay. I mean, obviously, if people are very interested in the whole process, we're probably not going to cover all of it. He's written, was it almost like 60,000 words on the whole thing? He's been thinking about this very profoundly, as he tends to do. If you look at his whole back catalog of blog posts and everything, it's been a journey. I've been reading his blog quite closely in the last year. So yeah, thank you for putting in all the elbow grease to present everything so meticulously and to show your perspective. I'm not, obviously I have a lot of people on the show, many subversives of every stripe. None of them I agree with completely, and this is the case today as well. I mean, there are certain things that I'm still a little bit skeptical of, but that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you and to bring you on. And welcome back. I essentially, the main thing that I wanted to discuss with you is what prompted your shift. You used to be kind of pretty much loosely aligned with kind of HBD, intelligence research, data analysis, not necessarily red pill, but the things that are more kind of race realism, things like that. You're interested in AI and all of these things. So this is stuff that you've been writing on probably for the better part of maybe a decade and a half now. So you have quite a serious back catalog, as I mentioned before. What prompted this thing? Was it a gradual change? Was it a sudden change? How did you switch sides?
It was a progressive disillusionment, I would say. But the thing I would note from the outset is that I'm not anti-HBD, I'm not anti-IQ now, because those are scientific facts. So the G factor, hereditarianism, these are things that are independent of political preferences, as I have always insisted. And in fact, it's, in my opinion, the really cringe people are those who start off as neo-Nazis or whatever, and then become either have some kind of crisis of conscience, or discover that their grandparent was a Jew or something stupid like that, and then flip to become a darling of the SPLC and sort of start out flip 180. I'm not a fan of that, obviously, and I mean, I was never into that sub-community. So as regards HBDIQ, I remain an HBDist, a base theorist. The main adjustment that I've really made is that I've become extremely skeptical about right-wing politics. I think they've attracted a critical mass of people who are A, not that smart, and B, not really that ethical, and don't really have any much of a positive vision for the world. And yeah, I mean, it was a gradual process. To some extent, I've always been extremely skeptical about right-wing thought, in the sense that, I mean, obviously, I was, like many people in this community, quite like extremely antipathic towards Dubia, George W. Bush, neoconservatism, and so on. In fact, for the most part, the reason that I was somewhat sympathetic with, although not self-identifying with the alt-right in the mid-2010s, is that apart from it having, to me, seemingly the correct HBD takes, they were also anti-interventionist. They espoused Saylor's mantra of not invading the world and inviting the world. But obviously, since then, all of that has collapsed, and some of them have become groypers who specialize in misogyny, pretty much, plus or minus. There's others who have joined the conservative grift, and to some extent, there's been a fusion between the MAGA and remnants of the alt-right, and to some extent, they've actually become mainstreamed within the Republican Party. And there's other people who've gone kind of liberal, like Vegetariania would be the prime example. Yeah, I mean, obviously, this kind of grift doesn't really interest me, like with the former two, or especially not with them. So that kind of cancelled itself out. Now, as for the Russian nationalism, for a long time, up until 2022, until sort of like Putinism revealed itself for what it was, through its completely bizarre and absurd conduct of the war, really laid bare a lot of the dysfunctionalities of the Putinist state. But before that, I did genuinely think, as I described in my article, The Z of History, that Russia under late Putinism did seem to be progressing along the correct direction, seemed to have reached some kind of synthesis where SJWism, wokeness, and so on was rejected, but without adopting much of the fringe ideologies that had overtaken what we know of as alternative or distant right. However, that soon, over the course of 2022, that was revealed for the chimera that it was. What began as a war of national liberation, or as the Kremlin's portrayed it, very quickly degenerated into a holy struggle against gay satanic Nazism. I don't want to be associated with redacted things like this, and I kind of gave up after that on the entire right-wing ideology. I was already disillusioned with the Western variants, and since sort of like Putinism turned out to be a fake as well, what else is there left?
Excuse me for interrupting, but what was interesting to me is how, what happened in Russia was extremely entangled with politics in the US. It was kind of trying to catalyze the energies of 2016, the alt-right, dreams of a different life. There's a certain fetishization of Eastern Europe that I've seen quite a lot in the American right. I mean, I'm not helping necessarily producing my podcast here for the Western audience here in Eastern Europe, but it's this idea that there's kind of like a based center here that
I
If the whole world goes to shit, Eastern Europe is here as the stalwart. Yeah, Poland used to be like the example, but because Poland now is kind of the antithesis of Russia, which is now the example of this is actually based.
yeah.
Poland has kind of fallen out of favor. So it's really interesting to see how you know even countries in Eastern Europe are using this huge mirror in the US. They're using this huge mimetic potential to fight it out amongst themselves, and also are influenced quite a lot by what's going on abroad. That's the
Mhm.
audience for whatever's happening here, which is so strange because these are like ancient problems. This is not the first time there's been a land dispute over Ukraine, but it's a very different flavor because it's almost kind of theatrically played out for the American boomer. It's very
Mhm.
strange.
Yes, it is obviously, and in Putin's rhetoric, it does cater to American boomers. And again, like what did I like about Russia in the like 2020, 2021 period? It was there were some positive developments. So Article 282 was decriminalized. That was the major hate speech article at the time. It seemed that Putin was adopting elements of the like Russian long-term Russian nationalist agenda. I mean, I'm not talking about that or based stuff like socially conservative stuff. I was never interested in that. But I mean, things that seem to me, and well, I frankly still do seem to me like good policies, such as the repatriation programs from Central Asia and the near abroad. There was even the IVF laws were liberalized in a pretty radical way in 2020 or 2021. So as and at the same time, this was in contrast to the US, where you had the entire thing with the BLM. You had the meltdowns with Wokes happening in the late 2010s. There was every week there was some new scandal at the college with a cancellation or something like that. So at the time, it seemed to me that the West had become infected with an ironic woke virus. But what seems to have happened since then is that the immune system kicked in, and with Trump's departure, people kind of quietened down, actually. Whereas Russia, which I don't think it's like too much of an absurd exaggeration to say that culturally it might have been healthier than the West or the US at least in that period, like around 2020. But since the war began and since that war was not quickly won, it has entered a kind of accelerating political and institutional degradation. And I mean, I'm not just talking about things like well, like here's the thing. A lot of people have ended up in prison or jailed in Russia. I mean, I'm not just sort of speaking about Navalny, who was likely murdered in prison. Also, Strelkov, who was a major nationalist leader who was criticizing the conduct of the war. He was locked up for some absolutely fake reason. And these examples can be multiplied indefinitely. So what really happened with Putinism is that this is a regime that's primarily interested in its own self-preservation, and adopting this sort of like performatively anti-woke based rhetoric is part of this. That's why LGBT was recently pronounced as a extremist terrorist movement, even though LGBT, as you know, it's not anything real. There's no such organization as LGBT org. So basically, it's just complete legal nihilism. And one of my predictions is that sooner or later, some Z activist is going to go to jail because you are gay, like literally because you are gay, because it is gay to counter signal based Shoigu and based Gerasimov, who are the hapless people, defense minister and cheap general who are doing vicious, hapless war effort.
Yeah, it is interesting to me that when I came on the scene, maybe it was late 2019, early 2020, things were this seemed to be like the most free and intelligent spot on the internet. I was scoured the internet for information about these subjects that were like you said, HBD is a scientific fact. Even the American Association for Psychology acknowledges that there are differences in group IQs. How they package that fact is different, but this is common knowledge. But the fact that no one was talking about it, and then you end up in these spaces, but these spaces have a logic of their own. And now you have someone like the richest man in the world tweeting out this stuff on the daily. I mean, this is one already, this information. And the way even winning facts are taken, once the revolution kind of eats its own, as it always does. They tend to be diluted to the lowest common denominator. And to be honest, I mean, the space now is not what it used to be. The people who have clung to their fame have either been completely audience captured or are true believers, which might be a little bit of a problem with some of these things. It's just, I don't know. For me, it's been maybe a year or two. I'm also kind of a little bit of a different person because I've had 2 children, and that's quite a physiologically and mentally transformative time. You become a little bit more conservative in a good way. You're kind of looking at, okay, what's the world going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years? How can we make things work for children? I'm not actually looking forward to whatever the incel revolution or whatever people are, itching for in these spaces.
Okay.
not that it's likely, I'm sorry to say, but yeah, it's quite, I don't know. For me, as a talking head in this space, I've kind of made my, I don't know, my profile is pegged to the environment. I'm quite ambivalent about it now. I don't know exactly what direction to go in. I'm probably going to lose a big chunk of my audience. I'm sure you have too. It's not the place where the great minds congregate anymore, and that should tell you a lot about it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, to be honest, yeah, I mean, I have lost a substantial chunk of my audience, but I think there's 2 mitigating factors. Firstly, the people I've lost are people who, for the most part, overwhelmingly, I did not care to keep around, because I did sort of attract some rather unsavory followers during the sort of like my forays into the lands of the Titoids. The second thing is that I have something I share with Hanani actually is that I flip a lot on different issues, and this was something that I was doing like for the entirety of my career. Just sort of like as a brief survey, I started off as a IQ realist lib, then I went kind of leftist in 2020. And then I went like heavily MAGA Trumpist around the time of the 2015-2016 elections, because I was observing the wokes directly at university and was annoyed by this. And then I kind of became disillusioned with Trumpism by 2017. Explored some lands with Russian nationalists, and but that kind of also became an actual. Got into crypto as well around 2020. Was a spacious time to get in there. So yeah, I mean, I've been dealing in and out of various communities for a long time, and people have criticized me for this, but I think that, and that's fine, but I think that the people who are my sort of like core audience kind of have come to terms with the fact that what I say now might not be what I'm saying the day after tomorrow. So that's the second factor. But if there is a general trend in my evolution, I think there's 2 points I want to make. The first point is that I have become, if anything, something of a libertarian. I mean, I'm not sort of like embracing the entire sort of corpus of work, Mises, Rothbard, and Hayek, all those people. But what it sort of translates into is a more general disillusionment with established mainstream ideologies and, in particular, nation states. And I think that the network state concept is really attractive in that sense, because with the nation states you have you have a polity that was evolved over centuries of war to be effective at winning wars. But this isn't a super like effective or good model for promoting individual flourishing, however. So in theory, at least, it seems to me that having, say, a network, a world of 200,000 network states that are cryptographically secured and which unites people across shared interests, values, and beliefs is more effective than having 200 traditional nation states of subjects or, at best, citizens, many of whom are forced to be there. There's significant barriers to entry and exit between the legacy nation states and so limited choice plus this limited choice increases the power that they have over you, like in terms of taxes and so on, and like they can mobilize you. And that's I think that's an important issue because the average tax take of the nation as a percentage of GDP across the world is something like 40%, which is a huge percentage of world product. But at the same time, you basically have no competition in that arena. And so I think that my sort of ideology right now is network statist more than anything else. Just let self-associating communities figure out what works best for them, while decentralized technologies that have been developed in the crypto space have obviated the need for many of the functions of the traditional nation state, in my opinion. Ironically enough, the person within Russian nationalism who I was sort of mostly associated with, Igor Tasvinin, his penultimate article was actually Tsar on the blockchain, in which he basically called on Russian nationalists to create their own network state, essentially, because unlike me, he was by then extremely disillusioned with the Russian state, actually. He committed suicide a few months before the Ukraine war. I won't get into that because it sort of touches on particulars of the Russian nationalist movement that this podcast isn't going to be about. But yeah, I mean, to the extent that like people even want to pursue identitarian pursuits, I think they're going to have better luck doing that through the network state paradigm than by trying to like grandiosely these grandiose visions of somehow subverting existing nation states, be they Western democracies or the Putin regime.
Exactly. And what felt interesting, a few years ago was the distinct possibility of creating a counter elite, which I talked about quite a lot on this podcast, and it felt tangible at one point. At one point it felt like everyone in the world who mattered or was a contender for a counter elite knew about Curtis Yarvin, for example, knew about the space. Obviously there's a swath of billionaires who know about this space. They're kind of plugged into what's going on here. There's power associated with it, and it seemed like it. The space has now either been co-opted by the mainstream. The talking points have moved into the mainstream, in which I mean, Normie Con, the Daily Wire type tier things, or have been. It's just a bloodbath of sub 100 IQ people, I don't know. Every time I log on to the social media site, Twitter, now known as X, it's just, the quality of discourse, the The novelty, just the average IQ of the space has dropped precipitously. Which, you know, you could say this is for different reasons. Unfortunately, the more strict right-wing dissident right propositions attract a certain type of person, either from the West, which is essentially a disenfranchised, you know, subclass of man, and also a lot of people from not the West, who LARP as people in the West. I mean, you know, including myself. But you know, a lot of them are quite vocal, and it's essentially kind of polluted the space to a point that it's, to be honest, almost unusable. It's not interesting. It's lost any sort of cachet. So yeah, it's to be honest, everyone I talk to in the space, and I'm sorry to say, pretty much every woman who's been involved in the space is absolutely grossed out by it, and it's lost its shine in any way. And you know what I mean? It's like maybe 4 years ago, there's kind of this in evolutionary psychology, there's kind of this operationalization of sexism into benevolent sexism and hostile sexism. 4 years ago, we had benevolent sexism. That's kind of the high status sexism, where, you know, you're aware of sex differences and you, you know, are act chivalrous about them while not disregarding them. This is what we had, I think, at least it seemed to me, and I think it's a very legitimate form because sex differences are absolutely real. What we have now is, you know, Rwandan radio level of hostile sexism everywhere. Just, and obviously, I'm sure that a lot of people listening or watching this do not have the same experience as I have as a woman on the right, you know, logging into these spaces. But it's, you know, it's like that meme with all the sausages striking the woman's face at one point. Well, it's essentially, you know, not in a pleasant way, but that's kind of the experience of being a woman in these spaces. And you know, I've got a pretty tough stomach generally, but this is just, you know, and the fact that there's absolutely no immunity to this. This is just how it is, and you put up with it, or you know, you go away because you're never right wing in the first place. Well, if this is the deal, you know, you can keep it, my friends. I mean, it's fine. I don't have to be right wing.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that many dietoids have a weak theory of mind and don't quite realize that if you sort of go on about how women are Jews and how they should be kept out of the workforce for their own good, and that it isn't a attractive political program for half the population, and as such, there's absolutely zero surprise, like with respect that finding that conservatism, like the conservative quotient has like sharply diverged between men and women in many Western countries, which I think is logical if Musk has undue on his spaces and that's viewed as normal. Then I mean, I think it's nothing to be surprised about that you will have a sharply negative reaction to that from the half the population. So yeah, I mean, I agree with that. There's no dispute there. With regards to the daily wire thing, what's the point of going there? They might be more HPG friendly right now, but if they're just using that to sort of continue pursuing a cultural war against LGBT and also like engage in partisan politics and above all just excuse Israeli war crimes. Well, I mean, I don't have any like skin in the game in any of those things. So what do they have to offer me? Like even that sector. And as regards the emerging the Groypers, well, I mean, they don't have any political prospects and their views are repulsive. So again, and low status. So again, why you want to be associated with them? No particular reason that I can see. So yeah, no dispute. I mean, in fairness, like some degree of misogyny, I think was prevalent in the like dissident or alternative right for a long time. So I mean, if you were in certain like communities back in the mid 2010s, if you're familiar with Fallout New Vegas, that's a video game. There's basically a faction called Caesar's Legion there, which many people there kind of identified with, amusingly enough. But I mean, that community, that kind of that like I would say was pretty fringed relative to the other stuff, because for the most part they had other like I do think that the alt-right at the time was more about sort of HBD realism and anti-immigration and anti-interventionism. I think those were really the big theme, and also not like pursuing a conflict with Russia. But today it's a different beast. I would actually say that anti-Semitism on the right has declined by a lot. Like you have, like again, if you go back to that era, you had those happy merchant memes being quite prevalent. Ironically, I think that actually just normal racism has decreased, like an ironic racism, like those sort of like edgy things with Sam Hyde and the white man cartoons. You don't really see them much these days. But I do think that there has been a corresponding shift towards an ironic misogyny, like in its sort of most psychopathic variants. And I mean, you can speculate why that might be the case. It might be because of the growing incel movement. I don't know, but it might also be that it's kind of a lowest common denominator, because as we know, the alt-right has become a rather multinational movement. I mean, it's kind of like a trope at this point that the alt-right is the last stand of implicit Latino identity in the US. And in the sense that women are kind of like the last sort of lowest common denominator outgroup, that might be one potential reason. But I haven't really thought deeply about it otherwise. Beyond that,
Yeah, it always reminds me of that kind of anecdote about kind of how kinks and psychoses and all this type of stuff are aided by the internet, because about a guy who wants to have intercourse with his toaster. And then goes on to r/toasterfuckers,
Okay.
and then he finds
Yes.
another 400 people who want to, and then that kind of amplifies, agree and amplify the whole concept of this is a real thing. There's a community. We all share our memes, and then the act of fornication with toasters, it becomes a integral part of this person's worldview, even if this was just like a passing thought before. And I think this can be drawn back to more common life experiences, like, for example, being rejected by women. One of the most clear trends in generations at the moment, Gen Z, even millennials, is risk aversion. Back in the day, you could, you would just kind of try your luck quite a few times, and then that was just the only arena that you would be able to play in. But nowadays, you have kind of this learned helplessness related to the opposite sex. And then that, if you have the internet and you're like, how to meet women, and then you encounter these spaces where people tell you, actually, women are demons, you should not meet them, they're going to bite your hand off, they destroy civilizations with their evil ways, and it's really easy to believe, especially if you've already had like 1 or 2 or 3 rejections, and which is absolutely normal. That's just the nature. I've had lots of rejections. I know it's hard to believe, but back in the day, I was really ugly in middle school, so I really, no one wanted to date me. So it's just the nature of life. And then when you have to contrast the nature of life to what's available online now as sources of wisdom from more experienced people like Andrew Tate or whoever, it becomes, it's a bit of a psychic burden, and I understand why why all this stuff is appealing to ease, the pain of existence for a lot of people.
But I mean, they actually, the interesting thing is that this was sort of like an issue for a long time, but I've kind of been. I mean, I was never involved in the sort of like the Manosphere and so on. but I have been keeping tabs on what was going on. And if you're talking about the 2000s, you had the so-called pickup artists at the time, people like Snow, Smithy, and like all those people. You can have different views on them, but my sort of opinion is that they were actually net positive, in the sense that they gave men who were not very socially adept actually and ironically good advice about how to interact with women and increase their dating success. And I think that was normal. They weren't like even particularly misogynistic. Then in the 2010s, it shifted more towards like people who were kind of like portrayed themselves as red pilled on women. They still gave good advice, but mixed in with the heavy side dose of misogyny, obviously, like Dufy and Chateau Hatiste. There was a famous one. Don't know what he's up to now, but I think Duf became a religious fundamentalist when he hit the male equivalent of the wall. But as I said, I don't really follow him. But in fairness to them, I think they were writing like useful, objectively useful stuff apart from their political brainworms. But in the 2020s, the scene seems to have become dominated by people who don't really seem to offer any good advice at all, like Andrew Tate, who's pretty much just a scammer. I mean, I think there was a conversation where he openly boasts about scamming his simps, and it's basically the loser's idea of what a successful man is. I mean, to be fair, Tate is objectively successful, but you're not sort of going to become successful yourself by trying to emulate him in these strange ways that Tate fans are prone to do. And HP, that zero HP Lovecraft person who's has a striking degree of popularity in that Manosphere, dissident right sphere that I never really understood. I mean, I only ever like read his Twitter takes. I haven't read any of his longer stuff. But I don't really have any big desire to sort of delve into the longer stuff based on tweets I've seen. So, the general trend I see is that even in the Manosphere, there seems to have been an ironic decline in intellectuality and also the benefits it gives to its sort of adherents over the past 20 years, essentially.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember I was watching some of that Manosphere stuff maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know, a guy called Tyler and Julian or something like that. I don't exactly know. Probably maybe they rebranded as something else. And it was all kind of, these guys were kind of past it. And they were all essentially selling some sort of almost like a spiritual retreat at that point. They were just like all kind of grossed out by it. And the kind of secondary effect of the spiritual retreat, where you become a good person, and you also kind of loosen up socially, was that, women would also, but that was kind of like secondary. So it was very fascinating to me that I kind of got to that point where this was already kind of self-improvement content. And this is people who were, in the, kind of same generation, maybe a little bit after Mystery, and after, Style and that age. But yeah, and Roosh V, obviously, I think he's Orthodox or something like that now, and it's quite interesting. Right. Anyway, this is my particular bone to pick, obviously for genetic reasons, but we can move on from this and go to something that I think is very much core to the dissident right, which you've also changed your mind on, is the idea of immigration, open borders.
Yes.
Which this is quite a spicy nugget for someone who's been very much against this as I have. But I wonder what is the case here for open borders? What do you see? Why is it fine?
Okay, a couple. First, it's about intellectual consistency. As I said, I've become extremely disillusioned with legacy nation states. I don't believe any nation state represents me or stands for my values. I think many people who think otherwise are deluded into doing so, certainly as pertains to anybody in the nationalist or identitarian space, in my opinion. That's regardless of whether you're talking about Russia-based Poland, or like the sort of like Spencerite conceit that oh, Bidenism is sort of like cool after all. Well, I mean, it is cool in my opinion, but for rather distinctively different reasons. The second reason is that it's also about, I think, like reconciling with intellectual honesty. Because one of the core findings in the HBD space is that smart fractions are more predictive of national socioeconomic success than the average. So realistically speaking, the influx of a lot of immigrants would not necessarily actually decrease the welfare of any particular person within that society. Now, theoretically, you could sort of have wage suppression, yes, but immigration would have to become massively bigger for that to have an effect. Furthermore, insofar as I support open borders, it's truly open borders on a radical scale. So that would also involve third world countries opening up their labor markets and their property markets to the first world as well. So just going there and downshifting to most of the, I mean, there are some favorite destinations like Argentina, Turkey, and so on, Thailand in East Asia. But that's not the norm. And even there, like with Thailand, you have difficulties getting property, buying property. Ideally, what you want is to liberalize, have these countries also liberalize their property markets and like allow people to stay not for 3 months or 6 months visa free, but indefinitely, essentially. And in that sense, you will have at the global level a much more efficient distribution of labor flows and capital flows. And that's one of the findings of economics. Network effects matter. Economies of scale matter. Why is the US richer than the EU and more dynamic than the EU or Japan? Many reasons. It probably has a bigger and better smart fraction, but a non-trivial consideration is that unlike Japan, which has 127 old people, or the EU, which has many more people, but which is fragmented across national borders and regulatory regimes, despite the efforts of the EU. The US is a true common market with extreme mobility of labor. And if you could sort of make the entire world be more like the US, then that would, all else equal, be a much better world in all probability. And the sort of like the one major objection to this is the one that Gareth Jones raises. Ironically, he was actually more pro-immigration when he wrote Hive Mind. He's now become anti-immigration because of his argument that immigrants bring their culture and with them, and this has a negative effect on institutions. However, my counter argument to this is that, and this sort of like ties in with his arguments to have less democracy, not more democracy. Now, in my opinion, the sort of like the anti-democratic regimes have really sort of lost the plot, like China with total COVID lockdowns, Russia with its sort of failed redacted war. That's the first thing. The second thing is that like we see, like if we take the extreme example of this, that right-wingers cite a lot, South Africa. South Africa is supposed to collapse any day now, if you read Amrem or the Yoons Review and so on. But it's kind of chugging along. Now, yes, I mean, it's not a very functional country. It's lower middle income. It has blackouts. The internet is slow, high crime rates, and so on. But if you look at the statistics, its stock market has a market capitalization of $500 billion. That's bigger than Russia's right now, by the way. It's in the Nature Index, which is a proxy for scientific output. It produces approximately what you would expect a country of 5 million white people to produce. So, I mean, like, yeah, it sounds racist, but like I guess it is. But it's also kind of anti-racist because it's making the argument that having a lot of like low IQ like basis of a low average IQ at least as of the present day, doesn't actually lead to collapse. And I think this seems to have relevance to immigration. And when people emigrate, also it's not a simple matter of bringing their culture with them, because they're also transformed by the impact of immigration. You're familiar with Eastern Europe, so the Poles who were displaced from the Western Soviet Union at the end of World War II and transferred to the former Germanic lands in Western Poland, they became actually much more like modern, with like, well, there are good aspects to that, like they're more productive and wealthier. Some bad aspects, higher rates of illegitimacy, abortion rates, and so on. Like, but you have a similar effect with in Czechia, I believe, like in the Sudeten, former Sudeten areas. But what I'm basically illustrating is that like when people move, they delude themselves, so they actually obviate their traditional cultures to a significant extent, actually. And that's the third factor. Which kind of makes me rather skeptical that the sort of like cultural transplant argument is going to have a sort of like a very big and detrimental effect. At the end of the day, America itself, the people who came there, I mean, there was obviously some element of selection. They were smarter and especially much more risk-taking than the European average. But also, the US in some ways became a more sort of radical society on account of that, a proposition state that in a way that no European country really is. So it has its pluses and its minuses, but yeah, I mean, those are basically my complex of arguments for open borders. And at the end of the day, I think that the largely ironically disagrees, but in my opinion, the entire concept of network states, it's extremely aligned and loaded on open borders, because in my opinion, the network states become more viable and stronger in the sense that the global migration regime is more liberal. It ultimately translates into greater freedoms of association, which is what we're ultimately concerned about.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this shorter version of the Subversive podcast. For the full version, for the full archive, and for pretty much everything I've written in the last 3 years, please do head to the Substack link in the show notes, or to Patreon if you just want the audio version of the podcast. Thank you so much for your support. This is literally what keeps the lights on, the sparkly, twinkly lights that I got for the podcast, and puts food on the table of my children, multiple. So thank you so much for your kind support, and see you next time.